Hello friends, I'm Ashish Darbari, founder and CEO of Axiomise. To our new listeners, welcome, and to our old ones, welcome back. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Simon Davidmann, CEO of Imperas and one of the co-inventors of SystemVerilog. Hello Simon, you are the CEO of Imperas, one of the inventors of Verilog, a key voice in the RISC-V ecosystem. Before we talk about the fascinating things you're doing now, I would like to share a bit on your personal journey, especially where were you born, how did you get into science and engineering, if you don't mind.
Sure, Ashish, and thank you for having me on this. I was born in the UK, and I guess I was an inquisitive child. I wasn't sure of my career direction after doing my sort of schoolwork, and for a degree I went and decided, okay, I wasn't sure, so I did maths, physics and electronics as a joint thing. But in my first year, I touched my first computer. I mean, that was back in 1978, and that was a DEC, PDP-10 and Fortran, and I was completely hooked. And I was just intrigued by the software side of things, but much more I was intrigued about how it was built, and wanted to try and understand. So I decided to switch and focus on basically electronics with a bit of computing behind it. And so that's the degree I did, straight electronics really, and built projects using early microprocessors back in the late 70s. And I stayed on and started a PhD, I should say. I never finished it. It was focused on simulation. And I got into hardware description language and gate-level simulators, and ended up moving to another university where they were developing a simulator and a language called HILO, which was the first sort of HDL with timing in it. And I was
sorry to interrupt you briefly. So which year was this when you were looking at HDLs and your
back in my PhD days, it was late 70s, 1978. Wow. I started a PhD on simulation, where I had a simulator from Carnegie Mellon, another one from another university from America. And I basically pulled them apart and put them back together again and built a multi-level simulator. But was more interested in the languages of simulation and moved to work on the HILO project at another university to work on that language and simulators. And that HILO technology actually became the basis of Verilog. And its focus was really on the simulation of boards and then chips, to verify chips. And so I did that back to, early 80s, 84. And then I got seduced by a friend of mine who was into electronic music to go and join his music company, digital percussion company. And we built electronic drums. The company was called Simmons, and we became famous as the creator of electronic drums, where we built hexagonal drums. And in the 80s, you watch all the UK and also a lot of American pop bands that were using these hexagonal electronic drums. And initially they were basically analog, and I was brought in to add computers to this. And the last product I built there had 5 microprocessors in it, including 2 DSPs, a 68K, some 8051s, hard disks, floppies, screens, trackable, 16-bit sampler, sequencer, MIDI, and full drum kit. And it was an amazing technology. It was like building an early Macintosh computer.
This sounds really fascinating. So what I find quite intriguing in your journey is that, okay, you played with computers early on, then you got interested in simulators and into hardware description languages, and at the same time your interest in music was making you do a lot of hands-on work with building things with processors and music and so on. It seems to be a common theme I hear quite often, Simon. We talked to Harry Foster a few weeks ago, and he seems to have a lot of interest in music. It seems like music and science and music and electronics seem to be quite closely connected. So I want to talk to you a bit more about the HDLs and the simulators in a while. But you said you didn't finish your PhD. Was it because of a particular reason, or because you just thought there were more interesting things to do outside the PhD life?
Yeah. There were 5 of us on that project, and all of us were registered to do our PhDs, and all of us got decided it was more exciting to build things rather than research them. So, I'd only been a couple of years into my PhD, and I wanted to build simulators. I didn't want to write up about things. I wanted to get things and build things that people could use and touch and play with, and really try and understand how to build things. So it was about building things for others to use that I was doing with the HDLs. And actually, I went and lived in America for a while and enjoyed that. helping the early customers of HDLs and designing their chips. But I got into wanting to build things, hence going back into an electronics company to build, where I was the technical director. So I was involved as the architect, and actually I did a lot of the electronic design and the software design, and got more and more into the software side of things. And actually, as I said, that last product we built had 5 intercommunicating processors, all with pipelines sharing between them and sequences and stuff like that. And it was all real time, and it was very exciting to build products and have some of the world's best drummers come into the factory and try and play it, from great jazz drummers like Billy Cobham through to Bill Bruford from Yes and King Crimson, all users of this technology, and plus all the pop bands as well. It was just very exciting, but it was about building products that people could use and understanding underneath of them there's a lot of electronics and microprocessors and software going on.
So this is 1980s, right?
Yeah, early 80s, and 84 to 88. And actually, we ended up, for that last project, we built 2 custom circuits, and they actually were verified NEC chips with high load. And I got lured back into EDA again after that. I thought, well, actually, EDA is just getting more exciting. And actually, high load, then the guys who I'd worked with, they evolved it into Verilog, and I went and joined Gateway, the developers of Verilog, and help set them up.
Right. So before you get into the Verilog, right, I just want to take the opportunity to highlight 2 interesting snapshots. So we're sitting here talking to you in 2020 as CEO of Imperas, and you're talking about all of this fascinating work on simulators. I mean, you're talking about building simulators for digital systems and building microprocessor-based musical instruments. This is way back in the 80s, when a lot of the world didn't even have access to processors or even computers. I remember playing with one in 1982 at home. But now you are at Imperas. You're running a very successful company. So in these 35, 40 years that have elapsed, you were beginning to say you were moving into Verilog. So I want to talk about Verilog in a second, but first tell me, what is Imperas doing these days? What are the key technology challenges you're overcoming with your solutions today at Imperas?
Yeah, so, okay. I mean, it sort of evolves through the hardware and software, but in the Verilog days, I'll come back to it,
Sure.
It was all about trying to ensure that a chip worked, okay, about verification. And, simulation is the foundation of all SoC verification. And it's a very successful, very intense part of the EDA industry. And what we found before it formed Imperas is that we kept finding customers in their SoC that had lots of little processors doing state machines, doing controllers. And there was a lot of software deeply embedded inside the SoC that the user never sees. And what I realized is that the challenge that they were having was it was very hard to verify their solutions when there was sort of a lot of software inside them. And it became apparent back, mid-2000s, that all electronic products were going to be defined by the software that they have in them. And the microprocessors, the processors inside it was going to enable so much software, whether it was a single processor or many little processors, and software was going to define electronic products. So what we did in founding Imperas was say, nobody designs an SoC without simulating it, and nobody should design and develop embedded software without simulating.
Absolutely.
So we basically, Imperas was founded to try and provide simulation, verification, debug, and analysis for people building software in embedded systems, in the same way the EDA industry is built up to give people simulation, verification, analysis of SoC designs. We wanted to provide that to the software developers in the low levels, and the firmware and the hardware connected software that are in electronic products. And so that's really what our focus in Imperas is. And
that sounds very unique to me, because you're targeting a very important problem space, which is, as you said, development of embedded software. And
yes.
You're saying, okay, let's build simulators and actually address that problem. I don't know if there are many companies who are in that space.
No, and I think that if I use the words virtual platforms, and that's what these are. You'll be aware of that, and that's what a lot of companies, the terminology they use. The purpose of a virtual platform is it allows people to model their SoC or their platform in a way that enables sort of high performance simulation, so they can get their software to run and then provide tools to allow things like multi-core debug, analysis and profiling of how things are software is running, and then help that into the verification domain and hook into the likes of the Verilog world, so that they can have simulations of their software running while it interacts with the detailed RTL of their behavioral components, their peripherals they're building. So that, our focus in Imperas is to provide high-speed simulation and analysis of software running, so it can be used for people building the systems, building larger software systems.
So are you actually building simulation models of just processors, or also the other components in the SoC, the peripherals, the buses?
Yes.
Is it everything?
There's sort of 3 or 4 levels of this. There's the basic processor components, and we have a library of 250 to 300 public models from all the ARM, all the MIPS, Power, Renaissance, and more recently RISC-V. So those are instruction accurate, very high performance simulation models of the processor. We then have a library of behavioral components, where there's about 300 of those, which cover simple things like UARTs and IOs and things like that, but go all the way up to Ethernet and USB. And some of them are just register functionality, but some of them are full functionality, so that in our simulation, you can simulate an ARM system with the USB, and then you can actually plug a memory stick into your PC, and the simulation can read and write it, because the USB simulation model can actually talk to the USB drivers and device in the hardware. And Ethernet, we can have a simulation of an Ethernet device as part of our ARM or RISC-V platform, and then you can do a wget in your simulation and access the internet and download, Facebook pages and things like that, and browser. And so that, yes, we have the processors, yes, we have the behavioral models, and then we have a platform library and technology, so you can build your own platforms and extend them so that you can take a reference that we've created or add to it. So we have models of standard parts from companies like Renaissance, from in the automotive space, from the likes of ARM, Versatile Express and things. More recently, the Sci-Fi have an FU540, which is a quad-core, actually, processor board. And so we have simulation models of those boards, including the processors, and Big Little from ARM. And you can do SMP Linux. You can take a Linaro ARM distribution and run it on our simulation platform. The software does not know it's not running on the hardware. And you've got the capability of modeling the processors, the behavioral components, and the platforms. So you have a complete simulation environment which can be used for software development, and the software doesn't realize it isn't talking to hardware. So you can get that much earlier in the design process, and it sort of enables this whole methodology.
Are you also looking at cache coherency and memory subsystem type modeling? And is it even a relevant problem to address at the software level?
It's definitely a problem in the verification space. It's not really at the software functionality level. It is from a performance point of view.
Yes.
And the area that we work in is instruction accurate, where we don't model pipelines and we don't tend to model caches. We can model the cache, it's just a memory translation and a way of storing it. So we do have models of things like caches, but we try and steer our customers away from that and say, the focus of what we do is to be able to boot Linux in 5 seconds in a simulation, right? To be running at real hardware speeds.
Level of abstraction is at system level.
Exactly. So the idea is we're at the software level, and we're not trying to be cycle accurate like an RTL simulator or whatever. We're not there for the detailed, architectural pipeline analysis or cache analysis.
Absolutely.
So the answer is we try and avoid modeling the detail which will slow things down. But also, if you're not modeling the pipeline, cache effects really aren't accurate, they're bogus. And so we try and avoid modeling. We do have models of caches and things like that, but we don't recommend their usage.
Yes, I think this is a very interesting point, Simon, because we at Axiomise are building RISC-V architectural proof kits where we are actually looking at verifying the core behavior with respect to an abstract model of the memory, and we don't actually care about how many levels of cache coherency you have, because that's not the problem we are solving at the level of verification of the core. But we're still looking at the core level. We're not actually verifying the full SOC, because the full verification of SOC is a different problem. And the problem you're solving here is an SOC embedded software bring up full operating system. And this is very interesting. So let's dive a little bit more into the RISC-V. I actually did not know. I know you mentioned this to me before, that you were looking at ARM for a very long time, but all of your marketing and PR updates these days is very much focused on RISC-V. So I don't think a lot of our listeners would actually even know that you've been serving the ARM ecosystem for
I mean, in terms of our business, I think RISC-V is probably about 50% of it now. Where we've been working for years around ARM and MIPS, and I think we have 12 different ISAs that are public, 12 public ISAs that we have models of with their processors, and we have 3 or 4 which are proprietary, that people have used our technology for their own ISAs internally and used our technology. But yeah, so we started off focusing on the sort of simulation of systems to allow people to do more of the software side of things. But what's happened with the evolution of RISC-V, there are more pressing challenges that we actually have capability to address, namely verification. In an ARM MIPS world, you buy a core from them, and you don't have to verify the processor. You just do integration testing. It's much more a system thing. Whereas in the RISC-V world, because of the freedoms that an open ISA gives you, it means everybody underestimates the amount of verification they've got to do. So we for the first 10 years of Imperas almost, we sort of shunned away and kept away from verification, saying, well, that's served by all these other things. But actually, in the RISC-V world, there are no good solutions out there, or there were no good solutions out there, because the art is that if you buy an ARM core, it's verified by ARM, and you just plug it in and it works. But with RISC-V, you need solutions to verify that the process is working, and you have to do much more than just an integration test. And the issues are things like, everybody's going to change it. There's custom instructions, custom records. Also, you can pick up open source, and how good is that open source? How compliant is it? How much verification do you have to do? There's a lot of unknowns in the RISC-V world. I mean, it's wonderful in lots of ways, but it brings all these challenges. And what we saw is that the virtual platforms and the simulation technology that we are one of the leaders in was absolutely essential and applicable to this RISC-V evolving market. So we got drawn, customers would find us and bring us in and say, well, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? And so, the nature of the beast with RISC-V is it's phenomenal. It's open. You can do anything you want. But with that freedoms comes this responsibility to verify it. And people underestimate that. And so what for us, the easy thing is doing the RISC-V ISA. The hard bit was all the tools, and the high-speed simulator, and the multi-core debug, and the verification and analysis tools, which were all ISA independent. So just plugging in RISC-V ISA means that we have the ability to use all of these sophisticated techniques and tools actually in the RISC-V world for very low effort. And so that's why, in a couple of years that we've been involved with RISC-V, we do have absolutely the fastest simulator on the planet for RISC-V, the most sophisticated multi-core debug and analysis tools and everything. And it's just starting, people are just starting to realize in the RISC-V world, they need it. For example, with simulation, anybody can build, any grad student can build a simulation of a RISC-V processor. But actually, to do sophisticated verification, I don't know, we've probably got 100 years of effort. Our simulation technology. That's not just 3 months, because you need the speed, you need the performance, you need the introspection of things, you need the analysis, you need all of this.
So let me talk about one verification aspect that, from a hardware point of view, is quite used in simulation, is functional coverage and in code coverage and other such things. Now, when we are looking at verification from a software point of view and simulating software models. Are your simulators able to do that kind of coverage analysis? Do you actually, and how do you go about creating the coverage specifications in the first place? So what is the story around coverage?
So stepping back to the original Imperas focus, where we were not focused on hardware design verification, we have technologies built into our simulation tools which do standard things like line coverage, completely non-intrusively. It's built into the simulator. We watch every instruction that goes past. We can see where it is related to the input C, and we can do all sorts of coverage. And so the basic simulation technology we have allows us to do very simple coverage, like instruction coverage, operand coverage, and line coverage and things like that.
Okay, automatically.
And so, yeah, well, it's built into it, yeah. And what we found is it was needed for, one, our own internal stuff to see how well we tested things. So that, you want to know how, we look at a model and we look at how well it's tested in terms of coverage. In terms of instructions, we do instruction coverage internally to make sure, again, that we've tested it. And then we take it further from a simulation point of view. We can actually do performance analysis on the model to see where the model is slow, instruction by instruction. So from day one, we've had the capability to do analysis on the details of the model.
So what about the functional coverage side?
Right. So when we switch into the sort of hardware DV space, there's the concepts of verification, which has come out with SystemVerilog with its cover points, that all the leading simulators have the ability to do this. And the sophisticated language developed so that a hardware DV team in their verification spec can say, these are the types of things that could be wrong with my microarchitecture that I want to explore and make sure that my tests have stimulated.
Okay.
To hazards in pipelines, values through different bits.
So you would rely on an external engineer to supply you the spec.
So we didn't have any of that technology. But what we did is we were drawn by customers to integrate with their hardware DV flows. And actually, one of our early customers was MIPS, 10-something years ago, who used our stuff internally. And they used it for DV as a golden reference. And so we had added lots of technology over the years based on requirements from them to get specific introspections into the model and things like that. But we didn't do anything on functional coverage. What we did do is we integrated our processor models into SystemVerilog test benches.
Right.
So that you could make use of the expertise in the industry that people have around SystemVerilog and the coverage groups and cover points and bins and the current methodology that's available in the standard SystemVerilog tools. So that what we see is that people describe the coverage that they're looking for in SystemVerilog.
Okay.
Now, running through our models can give them a lot of information. Now, we don't model the internals of a pipeline, so if they've got coverage where they want to probe inside a pipeline, they get a blank from us. But most people don't. They can detect things like the hazards, read before writes, and everything from instruction sequences. And we work with the Google Cloud guys on their RISC-V generator, and a large part of that over the last year, 2019, was to add functional coverage to that, so you could see how good the random generator's coverage was. And we added bit manipulation and vectors for RISC-V to that for under customer contract to do that. So our simulator does provide some basic functional coverage around instructions, but it's not
the same way, not in the same way as DV.
Oh, it's exactly the same way, but it doesn't give you the programmable ability that the language SystemVerilog does to describe your own coverage points that you might be interested, or even sequential ones.
Sure.
And we don't give you any form of sort of SQL query database to look for cross coverages and things like that.
Right.
We rely on the ecosystem where our simulation models work in a Verilog environment, and so our customers make use of the test benches that they're building around SystemVerilog, and they will just use our model in there as a reference for functional coverage.
Right. So this seems very interesting, Simon. I think we can continue talking about this topic for hours, but I have something else to talk to you about as well, which is your legacy, if I may say. So we were talking recently, and you mentioned about a paper you've written on Verilog and its history. And I think our listeners, a wide variety of our listeners actually are Verilog coders. So they would be interested to hear from one of the inventors on.
So I mean, okay, so it's nice you call me an inventor of Verilog. I would be embarrassed to claim that myself because I'm really not.
Why? Are you saying Verilog is not good enough?
No. I was involved in the team that developed Hilo.
Right. Yeah.
One of the guys went off, and Phil Morby created Verilog.
Yes.
And he did that. And I joined Gateway and helped the company Gateway promote and evolve Verilog to customers. And so I didn't get involved in the language design of Verilog. Sure. But what I saw is as an applications guy out in the field helping customers, I saw it had lots of deficiencies. And what I did is my previous company I founded in '95, Peter Flake, we founded Co-Design to take Verilog and extend it. And I ended up hiring Phil Morby, the original inventor of Verilog, to come and join me as a scientist within my company. And what Peter Flake and I did is we took Verilog and we extended it into what we called Superlog. And as it became an IEEE standard and through Accelerate, it became called SystemVerilog.
Wow.
And also got input from the Vera input in there. So I can't claim to be a Verilog designer of Verilog. I was involved in the evolution of the Verilog SystemVerilog language, and I'm one of the creators of SystemVerilog.
Wow.
And what happened is there is a technical academic conference every 10 years called OPL, History of Programming Languages, and it only has had 3 editions in the last 30 years, and the 4th edition is 220, and they invited Phil Morby to write a paper on Verilog. And Phil went, well, actually, his bit was only a little bit of it. So he invited Peter Flake and I and Arturo Saltz to be involved, because Arturo did Vera, Peter did Hilo, Peter and I did SystemVerilog, and Phil did Verilog. And between us, we wrote this paper with help from Steve Golson out on the East Coast in the US. And it's some 100 pages, and it's the ancestors and descendants of Verilog.
Wow.
So it's the history of Verilog up to the current day, talking about where it came from, who the people involved were, what was good and bad about the languages that we came across, what we like about it, what we don't like about it. And it's quite dry and academic, but it has a whole section on the people involved.
So where can we find this paper? Where can we find this?
So the conference was scheduled for June. It's not going to be an electronic conference. They're moving it back probably into 2021 now.
Okay.
But the paper will be published. And what we will do is at some point I'll put we'll probably do some press announcement, or we'll put something on a blog on our Imperas website for that, and so that your listeners could come.
No, I'm pretty sure I would love to read that one. And
it is pretty dry, talking syntax of these 1970s, 80s RTLs and HDLs and all the way to SystemVerilog. It is a definitive record of the development of what we have today as SystemVerilog, which is the leading language for designing. I mean, my kids are absolutely astonished when they read that 90% of the world's electronic is designed using Verilog.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was involved in it. It's quite tough. It is quite well. But actually, the big challenge now for me and Imperas is how we help everybody with their RISC-V stuff get that reliable out there in the world. And because we see it has the opportunity to change electronic products dramatically.
So Simon, I know you're a busy person, and we have to wrap up our chat today, but before I let you go, I wanted to actually take the opportunity to ask you if you can give 5 tips to become productive with design verification. And our listeners who are practicing professionals, early university graduates, when they're looking to make a career in design and verification, what can they take from your experience of decades of doing different things?
Okay. All right. So I don't know whether it's 5, but I'll give you some stream of consciousness.
Give me more than 5 if you like.
So the first is a tip. So one of the things that there's a myth that people say, and they say that hardware and software engineers don't talk, and DV engineers are just left in the back room. Right? That's a myth. Now, that's just not the case anymore. Virtual platforms help all this come together, whether it's the system engineers, the design engineers, the software guys, the hardware DB guys, and companies that embrace this, they end up starting very early with all the different tasks, the software task and the verification task, based around some sort of simulation of virtual platform. They end up with continuous integration and deployment. And so the myth that people don't talk, that's fake news.
Right.
It's people with virtual platforms. There's a lot of communication, and it can work very well very early. So that's the first one really, and I think the second is the tip is shift left, which is related to that. Hardware DB guys can start very early on writing the specifications for the verification, and can start the moment there's any simulation. They can start building tests. I mean, internally in Imperas, we start by writing the test before we write the code. We put it into our regression system, and we keep working on it till it passes, and then it doesn't go backwards.
Yeah.
And you have to. Simulation allows you to shift left, and that's virtual platforms. Very, very. So that's the second sort of tip, really. The third one is that there is a tremendous amount of existing expertise out in the ecosystems, and that it's too easy for people to try and reinvent it. Yeah. And you've got to, and that's happened a lot in the RISC-V world coming out of academics, and maybe they tried to reinvent it because SystemVerilog was expensive or whatever, or maybe didn't quite do it how they wanted it, so they just invent something new. So I think the third tip is that, use existing expertise, don't reinvent the wheel, focus on the job in hand, which is often verifying a chip and stuff. Look at the ecosystem, use trusted DBA partners. And, for example, SystemVerilog is absolutely the way to go. I mean, I read a lot of papers about people trying to do stuff in other languages, or, hey, Python's got a lot of people, let's use that. And that really rings back to, C++ has a lot of users, let's use that. And, I'm not a great fan of these things. I mean, yeah, SystemVerilog isn't the world's greatest thing, but it has a huge ecosystem behind it. Make use of the ecosystem to get your chip done. Don't try and reinvent things which are at the side of it. So that's the third tip. Fourth tip is never stop testing, or never start early testing. It's sort of running regressions. First thing you should do is build a regression test system, so that the moment you put a test in, it's tested all the time, so that you never go backwards. You can use, it is amazing how much automation you can use in this modern world with so many computers, such resources out there. It's phenomenal. Test. Because verification, that's the fifth one. Use everything that's possible out there. And that's, we sell dynamic simulation and analysis. Of course, there's static analysis, there's formal, there's, do all you can to test, whether it's, beg, borrowing, stealing tests, random generation, get all you can, do as much test, compliance tests, you've got to do as much testing as you can. And because fundamentally, tape out's a hard stop. There's no patching.
Yeah, there's no coming back unless you
There's no patching. Yeah. Tape out is the hard stop. So, and verification is everything. So, those are my tips, really. Use everything you've got, run as much regressions as you can, make use of the ecosystem, start early with virtual platforms, and make sure everybody's talking.
Yeah, this is great, because these are all of the things that are practically required at an engineering level, and I've been in different companies where I see that something which you may say is simple and common sense based is also not happening. But hey, thank you very much for your time. I know you're running very busy these days, despite the lockdown. I think you're all trying to get more and more work done. But I genuinely want to thank you for your time, Simon, today. I think we have a lot to cover on RISC-V. I think we can sync up again and take it from there. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Ashish. It's been a pleasure. It's been funny sort of going back to my roots and thinking about it. And yeah, I spend my day-to-day thinking and worrying about RISC-V, but actually a significant part of the world is not using RISC-V, it is using ARM. And there are some fantastic solutions out there. Yeah. It's exciting in the verification world at the moment, RISC-V, but the overall job of getting software up and running on embedded products, a lot of it is not RISC-V yet.
Yeah.
But, so we have to be balanced.
Yeah.
We're in a bubble of RISC-V at the moment, just because that's what my engineering is doing. But actually, a lot of customer focus is not at RISC-V.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you
Okay,
very
thanks
much.
very much, Ashish.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. So, friends, I hope you liked today's podcast. We were very lucky to be able to talk to such an accomplished luminary like Simon today. Do let us know by emailing us at info@axiomise.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay connected. And also you can subscribe to our Axiomise newsletters. So we will see you next week. Stay healthy and stay connected.